Okay, mate. Tip number 3, please.
Okay, tip number 3 is the use of D.I.R.T as a post-assessment formative tool. So, I remember years ago, and I don't know whether you might have been at this meeting, it was a teach meet that we held at our school. I remember a teacher from Calderstones High School in Liverpool came to speak to us, and she was talking about D.I.R.T, and nobody had heard of it before. So dedicated, I mean, it's a number of different titles, and it's dedicated improvement in reflective time is what I take it to stand for. I think I've heard dedicated independent reflective time. There's a number of different things to describe it. But it's been a game changer for me in my lessons, because the way I've used it is that the whole purpose of it is to start a dialogue with the students and to try and highlight something. I know that you love your misconceptions, don't you? Well, have you ever heard of a misconception before?
I have. I'm familiar with it.
You've heard it a couple of times, haven't you? So it was to give students an activity which, you know, might highlight one of those misconceptions, or it might get students to discuss. Now, the important aspect that I understand by D.I.R.T is to get them to have a little think about it, have a little think about maybe those common errors that they might be making, and discuss it with their peers. And I always think that my most enjoyable moments in a classroom is when I've set them a D.I.R.T activity to do. The D.I.R.T activities I usually do are, I might take a piece of work in, there might be 5 errors that I pick out from various people's piece of work, and I just put them on the board and I just write, okay, what's the error in these sentences? Dead straightforward. And talk to your partner for the next 5-10 minutes, and we'll discuss what we think the common error might be. And as I said, my best moments, my most precious moments in a classroom are when I'm not teaching, I'm just walking around and I'm listening to these high-level conversations. And I know it's language-based, but how French or Spanish works, and the intricacies of how the language is structured. And sometimes I think, I would never have heard you speaking in that way, in those terms, about French or Spanish, whatever it might be, if I hadn't have done this task, because you very rarely do, in a languages classroom especially, you don't get that much time to either speak the language or to offer answers, because unfortunately there's 30 other students in the class all fighting for that, you know, that airtime. But those, if you can have a collective, you know, a collaborative activity like a D.I.R.T activity, where the students are discussing it together, then I just think it's such a powerful tool. And to be honest, it does tie in with diagnostic questions as well, because I have the same experience when I use diagnostic questions, because I set it off to the students and just say, okay, well, which is the right answer, and can you have a little discussion about what those other 3, what trap have they fallen into with those other 3 then? And the conversations, you often don't give the students enough credit, do you? Because you listen to them and go, I've not even thought of that. That's a brilliant. I've not even thought of that as being a possible answer. So I love using D.I.R.T at the start of it, especially after an assessment, because what I'll often do is I'll take those 5 sentences out, and if you've got a nice relationship with the students, you can say to them, you might even recognise one of your own sentences here. And if you remember it well enough, then you can ask that student after they've had a conversation with someone, do you recognise that one? And they'll say, well, I do, yeah. And okay, what do you think it might be? Having spoken to your partner, what do you think it might be? So I just love it. And it's not a massive, you know, game changer or anything. But to be honest, it has been for me. And it's probably not something that's going to revolutionise anyone's teaching. But at the end of every assessment, once I've marked the assessments, I will do a D.I.R.T activity with the students, just to ensure that as a group that we've understood what those common errors might be. And the better, you know, as with diagnostic questions, the more we discuss the errors, the common errors, the less likely the students are to make them, because they're better at recognising them and then preempting them. So D.I.R.T is something which I love using. Do you use D.I.R.T much in maths?
Well, the thing is, it's one of those that has just been, it's got so many different meanings to so many different people. I've seen it used so many different times, but for me, the power has always been focusing on those common errors, as you've described there. But I've often seen it simply being used as time in class where kids just go through and respond to the individual feedback. And that comes back to the issues that we were talking about in your first tip, where that's very hard to get the kids to engage in that individual feedback and get stuff out of it. And whenever I've done that, I've spent my whole time just running around the class trying to either respond to questions or actually get kids doing something, and it's never worked. But I really like this idea of focusing on the common errors. So just to dive into the logistics of this, mate, for a second, Would you? So this is essentially whole class feedback, right? In
Yeah.
a type of whole class feedback.
Yeah.
So you're marking the books or the essays or whatever, and you're keeping a note of spotting common themes, and you're coming up with 3, 4, or 5 common errors that are happening throughout there. Are you giving the books back first before you do this activity, or are you holding fire on those?
Yeah, I'll give the exercise books back, and then I'll just say, right, open up your books on the next page, and again, I don't know whether you like using different coloured pens and stuff, but I just use green pens for their time. Especially because SLT can see that straight away when they
nice. Get the stamp out, mate. Dirt.
Yeah, get the stamp out, yeah. And then what I'll do is I'll write the 5 sentences on the board in black pen. I'll say to them, right, copy these sentences out incorrectly, so that these sentences are incorrect as they stand. Copy them out incorrectly, leave a line underneath, and then with your colleague, with the person sat next to you, have a little discussion about what you think the error might be. And if you're confident you think you've got the error right, then in your green pen underneath, write the corrected sentence out. And then after 5 or 10 minutes, we go through them together, and obviously pick on various students to talk me through. As I said before, I would try and choose the students who's made the error initially to see if they've reflected on it well enough. It's
really nice, mate. As you know, I'm a massive fan of misconceptions and errors just in general, in discussing them.
Should start on the website.
And this, again, another ramble here, mate. I don't know if there's even a question as part of this, but one thing I find really powerful is it's great for differentiation, because you could have a kid who's got their essay's perfect, or in my case, they've got 10 out of 10 in their homework, and you've got another kid who's done a really poor essay, or who's had an absolute nightmare in the maths exercise, but they can still get something out of this, because the child who's struggled, their focus is on trying to identify that error and correcting the error, whereas the child who's done really well, their focus, once they've identified the error, I often say to them, okay, how would you explain to somebody or support somebody who's made that error? Can you understand the error, and how would you convince them? Not by just saying, look, this is how you do it. How would you get them to resolve their misconceptions? So it doesn't matter what kind of level you access this. There's something in it for everyone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. That's the beauty of it. Everyone's involved, aren't they? And no matter what their ability level, they'll contribute something, won't they? And quite often they'll surprise you as well.
Yeah,
they'll surprise you at the level of thought that they've got. But as I said, the thing that I found most useful in languages is that you can predict the mistakes that they're going to make. That's the thing in language. You know that the ending of the verb's going to be wrong.
Yeah.
So if you can get them looking out for those, so that when you're doing an activity like that, they're looking out for the endings of those verbs, or they're looking for the word order, whatever it might be. When it comes to their own written work, they'll subconsciously know that they've got to pay attention to those aspects of the syntax.
It's really nice, this, mate. In terms of you made a really key point there about the fact that the kids will surprise you. Whereas if you're trying to differentiate, like really explicitly, like one kid will get this worksheet, one kid will get this task, and so on. But you're just playing a guessing game. Whereas every child has got that opportunity, and kids will surprise you the other way, right? The kids who you think will have a real good grasp of this, actually won't do. So it's The other thing I was going to say is, if you mark a piece of work and perhaps you don't see like certain errors that you've seen in the past, will you be tempted to kind of chuck those in as part of D.I.R.T, or will it always be related to things you've actually seen in that piece of work, if that makes sense?
As I said before, it's usually related to the things that I would have seen in an assessment. But just the way languages work is, as I said before, you can predict the types of mistake they'll make. So if they haven't seen that mistake for a while, you might just throw that one in. So you might just make one up, for example. But one other thing that I've done, and I don't know what your take on this might be, because when I've introduced this to my department, some of them said, nah, I'm not for that at all. But what I've said, and I've seen this on, I think it was on Facebook or somewhere that I've seen it in the past, and it's still D.I.R.T, it's still classed as D.I.R.T, but it's a D.I.R.T crib sheet. So it's one sheet. Because one thing that I don't know how you feel about marking, but marking is the thing that I despise most about my profession.
Yeah, correct.
And there's nothing more demoralising than taking 30 books into marking. You're like, I've got to work my way through these. So one thing I thought to reduce teacher workload primarily was a crib sheet. So just one sheet of A4, and on the A4 sheet there are maybe 6 or 7 different boxes. And in one of the boxes there might be a praise section. In one of the boxes might be presentation. One of them might be common misconceptions or class common errors. There might be, I think one of them are called a Polaroid moments, where someone's produced something absolutely amazing that we want to make a big deal about. And as you're marking the books, instead of actually individually actually marking the book and writing into their exercise book, you're just making notes. So you're flicking through their exercise books, you're making notes about those common errors that they're making, or anything that you want to highlight. And then the students all get that same crib sheet back. So you actually name the student. So you might even say, you know, the presentation from Craig is not too good here. And what do you think about that? About naming and shaming?
Yeah, it all comes, again, I think you've alluded to it before, it all comes down to relationships, right? If you know the kids and you know the class, it can be a really powerful thing to do. Yeah. And if you've got that culture where we're all in it together, and sometimes some kids are going to do well, but sometimes they're not going to do so well, then I think it can work really well. But again, we can all imagine kids for whom it's going to be an absolute disaster. So yeah, it's all teacher judgment for me on that one. But that sounds a really interesting one, and it's, like, again, when we were first started our teaching career, there was none of this whole class feedback, right? Like, it was all kind of, it all had to be personalised, individualised, and so on. And yet, it saves so much time, and it's super effective, isn't it? Yeah. You know, both looking at whole class problems, as we've already discussed, but also examples of excellence across the class. There's so many benefits to it. Yeah,
and, you know, if we go back to the EEF report as well, they mention things like live marking, don't they, and things like that, which are collaborative pursuits, aren't they, where everyone's involved, everyone's, you know, getting something from it, whereas, as you said, it just doesn't make sense, does it? It's not a good use of your time, is it, to be, as you said before, going around the room and dealing with every single student. And what I think is really important with this sort of feedback as well is explaining to the students why feedback is so important. Why is it important that we're discussing these common errors, and just get them to appreciate the fact that when they're doing an activity like this, that there's a real purpose behind it, and it's, you know, it's centred in the right, you know, in the right place. So I love using D.I.R.T after an assessment, but again, it's not for everybody. But I think that you're right, that as a collaborative way of giving feedback and getting students to move on and recognise common errors, it's something which I've found really useful.
And it's, again, just final point on this, like the fact that you've got evidence in books is an important thing, right, for SLT or whatever. That's often a problem with whole class feedback, that, well, how does it relate to my work? What have I got to show from this? But the fact that whether the kids are responding to those common errors and having that discussion, or they're sticking in the crib sheet or whatever it may be, there's the responses happen from that, and that feels like it's an important part.
You can reference those other D.I.R.T activities in the past as well. So you can say, well, actually, we did this error that we've just made here. We did that in last week in our D.I.R.T activity. Have a look back, and it's because it's in green, you can flick back relatively easily as well. So yeah, it does work well.
Lovely, that, mate.